Good afternoon. My name is Jill Zippin, and I am Chair of Democratic Jewish Outreach Pennsylvania, and I'm honored to welcome you to today's conversation with Pennsylvania Supreme Court Justices Christine Donohue, Kevin Dougherty, and David Wecht. At a time when our democracy, our rights, and the rule of law are under relentless attack, state courts have become one of the last lines of defense. We have witnessed courts across the country protect the choices of voters against frightening efforts to overturn election results and push back against partisan gerrymandering efforts. Here in Pennsylvania, our Supreme Court's Democratic majority has safeguarded voting rights, reproductive freedom, and civil rights when it mattered most, from rejecting Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election, to striking down gerrymandered legislative maps, to overturning a decades-old Medicaid abortion ban. These decisions did not just uphold the law, they protected people's lives and defended our fundamental rights. But the stakes ahead are even higher. At a moment when extremists are working to diminish trust in the judiciary, spread disinformation, and undermine judicial independence, this upcoming election will determine whether Pennsylvanians continue to have a court that defends democracy instead of allowing its demise under Trump. For Jewish voters, democracy has been a top priority for the past 2 election cycles, and with good reason. Our community understands what happens when courts fail to defend constitutional rights, equal protection, and civil liberties. The future of reproductive freedom, voting access, and elections in Pennsylvania will be shaped by who sits on this court. Before we begin, a brief introduction to our guests, all of whom were elected to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in 2015. Justice Christine Donohue was elected to the court after serving both on the Superior and Commonwealth courts, and has built her career on ethics and equal access to justice. Justice Kevin Dougherty previously led the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas and has focused on criminal justice reform and public trust in the courts. Justice David Wecht joined the court after serving on the Superior Court and as a trial judge, and is known for his work on transparency and constitutional rights. Today's conversation is an opportunity not just to hear from 3 remarkable justices, but to understand what's at stake, what lies ahead, and how each of us can play a role in defending the judiciary and democracy itself. To everyone who has supported Jewish Democratic Council of America's work, thank you, and who supported DJOP's MPA, thank you as well. JDCA continues to be your political home and your voice in this fight, along with DJOP in Pennsylvania. And we invite you to stay engaged at jewishdems.org and at djop.org. With that, I'm pleased to turn the program over to JDCA CEO Halie Soifer. Take it away, Halie.
Thank you so much, Jill, and thanks to DJOP for their incredible work throughout Pennsylvania and for your partnership. We are thrilled to be joined by the 3 justices that are running in this critically important election to retain their seats on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So we have some questions for all 3 of you. We'll go to the first question. As part of the liberal majority on Pennsylvania's Supreme Court, you all have considered critically important cases on issues including voting rights, abortion access, and civil rights for the people of Pennsylvania. You were also a part of rejecting Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election and have aimed to defend the integrity of future elections. So please explain what is at stake in this upcoming election to retain your seats in terms of issues that may be considered by the court in the next decade. And we could start with Justice Wecht.
Well, thank you, Haley, and thank you to all of you on this call. I have admired the work done by JDCA for a number of years, and a couple of my former colleagues on CapPac are, I believe, on your board. So it's nice to be with all of you. I think that the future is critically impacted by the composition of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. As was mentioned, we played an important role in upholding the rule of law in the 2020 election. In the 2018 decision we reached in the League of Women Voters case, we struck down the flamboyantly gerrymandered U.S. House districts in Pennsylvania that had created an enduring, impermeable Republican majority in the House delegation, regardless of candidate quality, fundraising, or other variables. That map was really Exhibit A in our nation for the most obscenely gerrymandered map, and we ruled, Justices Donohue, Dougherty, and I, along with our colleague Justice Deborah Todd, ruled that it violated Pennsylvania's free and equal elections clause, and the Republicans were hopping mad. It was like taking a toy away from a baby. That impulse to gerrymander the maps and to leverage elections in a way that is violative of our Constitution is an impulse that unfortunately remains with some highly partisan actors. And what's at stake is this court, because if these 3 seats are lost, a renewed attempt will be made, and it may prove successful, to once again gerrymander the maps and influence the elections in 2026, 2028, and beyond in ways that disenfranchise large sectors of Pennsylvania's electorate.
Great, thank you. Justice Donohue.
Good morning, and thank you. In follow-up to Justice Wecht's discussion, I want to focus a little bit on the work that we have done, because, as you know, we really cannot address what cases might come before us in the future, but it's sort of like the disclaimer that you often get. Only I'm going to tell you that history is probably the best predictor of what the court would look like in the future with David and Kevin and I. We have taken the opportunity, unlike many of the Supreme Courts of Pennsylvania that preceded us, to actually interpret and enforce the Pennsylvania Constitution, which is really a magnificent document. And we've had the opportunity, because of cases that have been brought to us, to really focus on Article 1 of our Constitution. And I go into this detail because I think it's important to note that the first section of Article 1 of our Constitution talks about the inherent rights of mankind. And so everything that's contained in Article 1 are really those issues that impact individuals on a regular and ongoing basis. And with the opportunities that we had been given, we, of course, used Article 1, Section 5 of the Pennsylvania Constitution to decide the gerrymandering case that was brought to us. That's the Free and Fair Elections Clause. And it was the first time in the history of Pennsylvania that the Free and Fair Elections Clause had been employed in that manner. We also took the opportunity to interpret and enforce Pennsylvania's Environmental Rights Amendment, which is also in Article 1 of our Constitution. The courts that preceded us were unable to garner a majority to actually interpret the Environmental Rights Amendment and to make sure that it did what it was intended to do, which was to protect the resources of Pennsylvania for citizens now and for generations to come, so that there is clean air and pure water and the ability to enjoy the natural and historic resources of Pennsylvania. Interestingly, that amendment was passed in the mid-1970s, and we were the first port with David and Kevin and I to garner a majority to put teeth into that environmental rights amendment. And just as one more example, we have the very first equal rights amendment in the United States of America, also contained in Article 1, which details the inherent rights of mankind. And with the three of us, we formed a majority to make certain that it was clear that what that amendment meant was that this legislature could not infringe upon or deny the rights of individuals based on their sex. Very clearly stated. But before the three of us were on that court, our court had really lost its way in enforcing that in the manner in which it was intended. And with the majority that we formed, we made it clear that what it meant in very pragmatic terms is that the Medicaid statute enacted by the legislature could not provide for all reproductive health care for men and at the same time deny women the right to an abortion. Many of the rights to abortion that were denied under the Medicaid Act were to therapeutic abortions, and we made it clear that under the Equal Rights Amendment, rights had to be given equally to both men and women. That case, in pragmatic terms, impacts the lives of many, many poor women in Pennsylvania who are otherwise denied access to a statutory right provided in our Commonwealth. And again, interestingly, it was David and Kevin and I who formed the majority of the court that made certain that that was interpreted. So in retrospect, looking at the history of the jurisprudence that we've been involved with, we have made it clear that the individual rights of citizens of Pennsylvania as protected by our Constitution should be enforced, and we have done everything within our ability to do that in the cases that have been brought before us.
Great, and it looks like we have Justice Dougherty back with us. Justice, did you hear the question? We're glad to have you back.
I apologize. I got kicked out and I have to join you on my phone. I don't know what's wrong with my computer. I did not hear the complete question.
Okay, great. Well, we'll have a chance to answer it. I'm going to have you answer this next one, and then we'll go to everyone else. So I think that we have people watching both from Pennsylvania and then throughout the country. So could you explain how the Pennsylvania Supreme Court elections work, what makes your race unique, and for those who are not following this very closely, this can feel somewhat abstract in terms of a judicial race. What would you say to someone who asks, why should I care who sits on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court?
Great question. And the easy answer is because our decisions affect 13 million Pennsylvanians. And that is, I think, a sufficient reason to be concerned about who's directing your life. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court is prescribed in the Pennsylvania Constitution. Here's what most people don't realize, and I think David, Christine, and I have gone on a year-long Civics 101 teaching course throughout the Commonwealth, since most people are not aware of the judiciary. Our Constitution, in its 1968 amendment, required that judges would be duly elected under a partisan banner. The basis for that decision is that while we are part of the tripartite government, the people who created the Constitution thought it would be imperative that we judges go out to the people in Pennsylvania and we meet them. We look at them eye to eye, shake hands, answer their questions, have people determine, do we think like they do, and make an election. And in that election, we would be seated for 10 years. That way we would be in par with our brother sister parts of government, the General Assembly and the executive. However, our Constitution, because it believes that the independence of the judiciary is a sacred part of the Constitution, separately said that judicial officers, judges and or justices, at the end of their 10-year term would stand for retention, not run for re-election like the other two branches. The purpose being that politics would need to be removed. When we were elected judges and justices, the moment we put that black robe on, we had to hang up our partisan positions. And in retention, the people of Pennsylvania and the people of Pennsylvania only can decide whether we have met our constitutional obligation and whether we have kept the court in good faith. And I think the three of us have a 10-year history. All you would have to do is look at our jurisprudence and notice that our court has been seamlessly productive over the last 10 years. I think it's imperative that people understand this because unlike the General Assembly and unlike the executive branch, where majority rules, our job is always to be open to due process and make sure we have an equal playing field. Many times, the country will have periodic waves, whether it moves conservative side or moves to a more liberal forward-thinking side. The courts are not like that. We base our decisions on precedent and stare decisis. That's the beauty of the court, that our decisions are not political in nature. They're based upon the precedent and the cases that we have previously decided. We build upon that foundation. And I believe most people don't realize that because we often get broad brushed as being political as a result of negative comments.
Great. And Justice Donohue, what would you say to a first-time voter in Pennsylvania about the importance of voting in this election, this judicial election?
Well, number one, it's actually everyone's obligation to participate in elections. And that sounds sort of Pollyanna-ish, but, honestly, under our Constitution and the United States Constitution, citizens only have two opportunities to participate in democracy. One is service on a jury. The other is by voting. And to vote in a judicial retention race probably has the biggest impact of any vote that a citizen is going to cast. Because what they are determining is what the third branch of government looks like going into the future. As we've all discussed, our record establishes where we have been. But what the citizens have to realize is that what the judicial branch of government is the backstop of democracy. We are the only branch of government that can tell the governor or the legislature that they have violated our Constitution and they cannot continue down that path. Without the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in that role as backstop, there are no bumpers on what the governor can do or what the legislature can do. And our Constitution is designed precisely to have the judicial branch of government, and more particularly the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, in place to be certain that nothing gets off track, that in fact we maintain the rule of law, that in fact we live under the terms of our Constitution. And so again, this judicial election race is really putting to the people of Pennsylvania whether or not they want to maintain that backstop going forward. Because as you are undoubtedly aware as an informed citizen, if the three of us are not retained, the seats that would be vacated will not be filled until November of 2027. And who would ever be elected then wouldn't be sworn in until January of 2028. Although technically the governor has the ability to appoint people to fill our vacancies. That can only be accomplished if 2/3 of the Republican Senate agrees with him. And I think most vetting people say that that would never happen. And what that means is that we will have a void in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court of 3 justices. And what that will mean is that we will have a void in the functioning of that branch of government that is intended to be certain that democracy works the way that it is intended to under the Constitution. So it is a critical race.
Justice Wecht, I think that this point that Justice Donohue just mentioned of if these 3 seats are not retained, the essentially the void that would be left in the Pennsylvania judiciary. Could you talk about the implications of that and what are some cases that might come before the court at that time?
Yes, the court is a 7-member court, and there would be 4 people left on the court if the 3 of us lost our retention. That would be 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. The court would stalemate 2-2 on a great number of cases. Already with a full complement of 7, we rarely are unanimous. So there's very little reason to expect that a 4-justice court would resolve many cases. That would be a recipe for frustration, waste of resources, waste of time, lack of guidance, stalemate, and severe breakdown in the governance of Pennsylvania. It would also mean chaos, because when the 2026 elections come along, you'd have a 4-member court, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. Inevitably, every year we get election cases, particularly in the even years when the U.S. House seats are up. Next year would also be the Pennsylvania governor re-election. So they're bound to be election law cases. As a practical matter, chaos will reign here in Pennsylvania next year if the 3 of us are not retained. And even apart from election-related cases, the law in Pennsylvania will be a complete morass, because the court could only resolve things on a precedential basis if those 4 justices were unanimous, because a 3-1 decision will only resolve that particular case, say Smith versus Jones. A 3-1 decision of this court is no precedent for any other case. So the court would be functioning in a severely hobbled way, and actually issuing guidance in a very, very small number of cases. So it would be from a civic perspective, it would be disastrous. And as was pointed out, the chances that this Republican-controlled state Senate would confirm a single nominee from Governor Josh Shapiro in those 2 years is infinitesimally small. I mean, they can't even agree on a budget. We have no budget here for, I think, I can't remember now how many months. We're the only state without a budget. So given that the Republican Senate will not work with Governor Shapiro on a budget, there's absolutely no chance that they'll confirm a single judicial nominee from him. So the court would be really a rump, would be highly dysfunctional. And that's something that no American should want, given the inevitability of important cases coming up next year.
Great. Well, of course, Pennsylvania has been at the center of some huge decisions as it relates to the future of our democracy and voting access and the administration of elections. Democracy and the future of our democracy was actually the #1 issue for Jewish voters in the past 2 election cycles, so 2022 and 2024. And protecting democracy, especially as it continues to be under attack, remains a top priority of Jewish Americans. So looking ahead, what cases do you think will come before the court that pertain specifically to the future of our democracy? We'll start with you, Justice Dougherty.
I think Justice Wecht just pretty much shared with you the concern that the future cases have. We're talking the elections. All you have to do is take a snapshot of the national arena and realize that that can very well happen in Pennsylvania, but for the backstop, as Justice Donohue said, of our court being the backstop for democracy. But with regard to the congressional elections, the preparation for the next presidential elections, you have to remember in Pennsylvania, every 6 months we're having an election. That's the beauty of democracy. So with those cases comes the fear that the onslaught of potentially frivolous lawsuits would try to take advantage of the downsizing of the Supreme Court. And as Justice Wecht said, artfully leaving the court with a four-member body would not result in any major decisions, if anything, but stalemate, and having the lower court, that being usually the Commonwealth Court that handles government types cases, having their decisions stand.
And Justice Donohue, I'll just mix these up now because it seems like that we'll have each of you answer slightly different questions. You know, there's a lot of talk now, given the White House's persistent attacks on various aspects of our democracies, that that we may be either in or approaching a constitutional crisis. Do you believe we're in a constitutional crisis?
Close. The federal courts, almost all of the district courts, most of the courts of appeals have been vigilant in adhering to the precedent as they know it and enforcing the precedent as they know it. The United States Supreme Court has vast authority and vast powers. And I think time will tell what direction that court takes. As you know, as the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, our input, our control, et cetera, over that particular circumstance is really not within our bailiwick. However, and I'm going to harken back to the Pennsylvania Constitution, because that is our bailiwick. And our democracy in Pennsylvania is strong. We have lower courts, we have intermediate appellate courts, and we have a Pennsylvania Supreme Court that is dedicated to the proposition of the rule of law, which I think to most people means something very simple, that the law is applied equally to all persons, rich or poor, regardless of denomination, ethnicity, and our courts have been exceptional at that. The thing also to keep in mind is that when our Pennsylvania Supreme Court interprets and applies the Pennsylvania Constitution, the United States Supreme Court is without authority to impact those decisions. So it's one of the positive features of a federalist system in that regard, because citizens can be assured that when we, as David and Kevin and I have over the course of 10 years, interpret and apply our Constitution, that it is a standalone decision. And so my confidence in the democracy of Pennsylvania is very strong. And a large part of that results from what I have seen of our Pennsylvania Supreme Court in the past 10 years. We have been diligent in interpreting and applying the law equally. And I think that David and Kevin and I are as committed as any to the notion that the rule of law is, as we are the backstop to democracy, the rule of law is the backstop of democracy.
And Justice Wecht, I'll ask you the same question. Do you believe that we as a country are in a constitutional crisis?
I think we're nearing one, and I would say that our nation has had many, many constitutional crises over our 249 and counting years. We've had the Alien and Sedition Acts. We've had the nullification crisis. We've had the Civil War. We've had we've had the First World War. We've had the Palmer raids. We've had the Red Scare. We've had the Depression. We've had World War II. We've had the McCarthyite era. We've had the turbulent 60s. We've had Nixon and Watergate and on and on. So this is not our first period of turmoil and crisis and tension. What is different is that now we have social media and we also have AI. And these are stressors that have not applied in our democracy or our democratic republic in the past. So they pose special challenges with deep fakes and other kinds of gaslighting that can be amplified by reason of these technologies. I am very concerned about that. I think about the future. My wife and I have 4 kids in their 20s, and we'll have grandchildren hopefully soon. So, I worry about the future from their perspective. The Constitution has proven, our constitutions, plural, state and federal, have proven resilient in the past, and I hope they will, and believe that they'll continue to do so in the future. I do want to make a remark. I was vice chair of the state Democratic Party here in Pennsylvania before I entered the judiciary, and I wanted to say, as a fellow Jewish Democrat, to all of you, that as important as our retention is, I personally think there's something even more important I wanted to convey to all of you, and that is that I hope all of you will fight the rise of Jew hatred in our Democratic Party and speak out against it. I'm limited. I don't have all my First Amendment rights because I'm on the bench. I do what I can. I speak out against Jew hatred. I speak to law students. I speak to college students. I speak in public. But I don't have all my rights to lobby government, to affect legislative action, and to affect candidates, and you do. And it's imperative to the future of our kids and our grandchildren in this country, to which our ancestors came, that you fight Jew hatred on the left among Democrats. It's a scary thing, and I hope you'll speak out in support of Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, and also in support of Eretz Yisrael, the Jewish state.
Great, thank you very much. And Justice Dougherty, same question.
Well, it's funny. I think there's a constitutional crisis. I say, as Justice Wecht just said, and again, mimicking Justice Donohue, the reality is there's always the potential, as history has proven. But the beauty of the United States was summed up by a very close friend of mine and former colleague, Myrna Field. She enjoyed traveling the world, and she said, "Kevin, the most beautiful day is the day after elections." And I said, "Why, Myrna?" And she said, "Because when you wake up, there are not tanks rolling down your streets." And I have to believe that that separates our Constitution from any other document that other countries use to forward their country and protecting their people. I think that at the end of the day, our Constitution is strong enough to survive any challenge, because basically it would be un-American not to.
Thank you. I am now going to ask you all the same question. It'll be our final question. And I think that this has been eye-opening in terms of some of the biggest challenges that we are facing as a country, some of the challenges that you face in Pennsylvania. But despite these challenges and these tumultuous times in which we are living, what gives you hope? And Justice Donohue, we'll start with you.
Free and fair elections. To me, whether or not our democracy perseveres depends on free and fair elections, not only in Pennsylvania, but throughout the United States of America. It is the manner in which we can assure ourselves that what citizens want to happen in our democracy, in fact, happens in our democracy. And the biggest threat that I could see to our Constitution and our country as we know it is interference with those free and fair elections, which once again makes it so critical that we have a functioning Supreme Court of Pennsylvania to ensure in our Commonwealth, in our world, that a free and fair election is available to all of our citizens. Today, as we sit here, our free and fair elections in Pennsylvania are sound. We have had the opportunity over the course of 5 years, because really the challenges in Pennsylvania started after the enactment of the mail-in voting law, universal mail-in law. But for 5 years, we have put our finger in the dike every time it looked like there was a problem with counting votes, or what was a valid vote, or who should be able to vote and how they should be able to vote. And as we sit here today, based upon all of the evidence that we've seen in our court, we in fact have a solid, safe electoral system in Pennsylvania. And I believe that continuation of our democracy as we know it here and elsewhere is the assurance that free and fair elections will take place in November of 2025 and 26 and going forward. And that's where I base my hope.
And Justice Wecht.
I have 2 points of hope. One is our Constitution. As I mentioned, and I should say constitutions, both federal and state. And in that regard, I want to emphasize that Pennsylvania's Constitution is an ancestor, not a descendant, of the U.S. Constitution. It was drafted in 1776 in the same building, in the same city, in the same year as our nation's Declaration of Independence, 1776, Independence Hall, Philadelphia. And much of the material that gets into the U.S. Constitution had an inspiration in Pennsylvania's Constitution. So I have faith in the resilience, as I've mentioned, of our constitutions and our constitutional traditions here in our nation. The second thing that gives me hope is young people. I teach young people every year, both undergrads and law students, both here and in the state of Israel. And with respect to the people I teach here in the United States, I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged very much by the kids in Israel. That's a whole different story. But with respect to our nation's future here, I'm deeply encouraged by the fact that many of my young students are not all the time scrolling through Instagram. They have interesting questions about the law. They're interested in our nation's future, in the judicial independence and the rule of law. And I think we, including you and all of us, should continue to work on civics education and trying to help young people learn about our separation of powers traditions, our judicial independence, and the rule of law to ensure that the success of democracy in our nation continues into the future.
Great. And Justice Dougherty.
I would have to take a little more of a different path. Why I agree with both of my friends. I'm answering this question from more of a spiritual side. I have to believe that what the three of us are going through this last year is God's way of preparing us for permitting us to do what we ask, and that is to continue to serve the people of Pennsylvania. And the best way to describe it, and I always like to say, one of my favorite poets is Maya Angelou, and her one comment and one statement was that do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. I think that's what gives me hope. The three of us have worked tirelessly together over the last 10 years. And with the help of most Pennsylvanians, we're going to have an opportunity to learn from what we've experienced and move forward to make sure that we are in a better place tomorrow than we are today. That's what gives me hope.
Wonderful. Well, all of you give us hope. So we are with you. We are rooting for you. And thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you for all your work to defend democracy in the court in Pennsylvania. We are now going to wrap today's event. Speaking of young people, with Gideon Eichenwald, our program manager, and I'm very happy to turn it over to you, Gideon, to let us know what's coming next.
Thank you, Halie. And thank you to Justices Donohue, Dougherty, and Wecht for joining us today, as well as to each of you who tuned in from home. There has never been a more critical moment to defend American democracy, protect fundamental rights, and ensure that our judicial system remains strong, independent, and guided by the rule of law. Here at JDCA, we are proud to be fighting on behalf of the justices you heard from today, as well as a host of other candidates running in key elections across the country. I want to invite you to join us in taking action over the next 6 days before Election Day. Here are some ways you can get involved with JDCA right now. First, join JDCA with Senators Cory Booker and Andy Kim to canvass for Mikey Sherrill in Springfield, New Jersey this Sunday at 11 a.m. RSVP now at the link in the resources tab below and help us to get out the vote in New Jersey. Second, visit JDCA's Mobilize page to see all of our electoral efforts over the next week, including phone banks and canvasses targeting Jewish voters in the New Jersey and Virginia gubernatorial races. You can find the link on the resources tab below, and there's a host of other options for you to get involved there. Third, join JDCA in demanding that Speaker Mike Johnson swear in Adelita Grijalva to represent Arizona's 7th District. To sign the petition, click on the resources tab. Fourth, register for JDCA's next public program on November 19th with State Attorney Generals Dana Nessel of Michigan and Chris Mays of Arizona to hear about the ways in which they are combating the Trump administration in the courts. The link to register is in the resources tab. And finally, if you aren't already, we hope that you'll consider becoming a JDCA member or increasing your membership level and supporting our work. JDCA members have access to exclusive members-only programs with today's leading experts. On November 6th, JDCA members will be joined by Democratic political strategist Simon Rosenberg to discuss Election Day results. And on December 2nd, we'll be joined by New York Times best-selling authors Sarah Hurwitz and David Litt to discuss what it means to be a Jewish Democrat today. You don't want to miss these conversations, so please click on the link in the resources tab to become a JDCA member and to support our work. For Jewish voters, protecting democracy is not just a political value. It's deeply personal and rooted in our history and experience. Strong courts have the power to safeguard our rights and protect the freedoms that we hold dear. Hearing from justices today reaffirmed what is at stake in Pennsylvania's election next week, and why our voices and why our votes must be heard. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our upcoming programs and taking action together to defend democracy. Have a wonderful rest of your day.